Okay then. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome all councillors, officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. My name is Councillor Paul Myers and I'm the chairman of the panel. I'll now call out the names of the other members of the panel and please ask them to confirm that they're present. So if I could start with Councillor Dogood.
Present.
Councillor Elliott.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Hodge.
Present.
Councillor McPhee.
Present.
Councillor Furs.
Present.
Councillor Singleton.
Present.
And Councillor Warrington. Okay, is Councillor Warrington there?
Oh,
Councillor Warrington.
sorry, I couldn't take off my mute.
No,
Sorry,
that's fine,
apologies.
don't worry. No. Well, on that happy note, that means I think we've got a full house today. Also present are a number of officers who will be introduced as we make our way through the agenda. Can I please remind members and officers to try and keep background noise to a minimum and to only speak one person at a time and not to speak over others. I will look out in the chat, but if for some reason I have missed you, then if you wave your hand and then if you still haven't got anywhere, actually butt in and say something. I am looking at several documents and so sometimes it isn't possible to have everybody on the screen. If everyone could please mute your microphones when you're not speaking and then unmute when I invite you to speak. And as I say, if you can use the chat facility, the MIS facility, that will be excellent. Before we move on with the meeting proper, does anybody have any questions on that? No? Excellent stuff. Thank you. So we've got apologies for absence and substitution, but Michaela, if I'm correct, we don't actually have any. Could you confirm this, please?
Yeah, confirmed. No apologies.
Excellent. And under item 3, are there any declarations of interest, please? Yes, Alistair?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm the Director of Keynsham Community Energy, which has a business relationship with Aquis Developments Limited. It's a non-pecuniary interest.
Okay. And if I can ask, I believe it's Michaela to please note that. Yep. Thank you. Excellent. So if there are no other declarations of interest, I'll move on to agenda item 4, which is urgent business as agreed by the chair, and I can confirm there is no urgent business. And so we'll now move on to item 5, which is public and councillor statements. And I'd like to welcome and invite David Redgewell of Transport Southwest to make a statement on transport matters. And for this, David, you have 3 minutes. Are you there and is your microphone and link working?
Unfortunately, Chair, hasn't joined the meeting.
Right, okay. I'm not sure what we can do other than to move on. If he does arrive very shortly, we can see whether we can accommodate that and take it from there. So if I could then move on to agenda item 6, which is minutes of the last meeting of the 23rd of November. Does anybody have any comments or amendments for these? Otherwise, if I could have a proposer and a seconder to confirm them as a correct record. So just to begin with, are there any comments or questions? Karen? No, so it's no. I'm looking across. Could I have a proposer, please, and a seconder? Karen to propose and Alistair to second. If you just show your hand, all those in favour, we accept those minutes. And I make that unanimous. So thank you, everybody. Hal, your screen was covered. Did you have your hand up? Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Okay, Michaela, are you happy with that to note? Yeah. Excellent. So our next item is an update from our Cabinet member, Councillor Richard Samuels. Richard, just as an outline, I've allowed 5 minutes for this. If you need more, if you could say, and if you could give your update, and then we'll take questions from the panel members. So Richard, could I invite you to take the screen?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I'll divide this into two parts. The finance part covering obviously the budget preparations, and the second part some just updates on the work we're doing on reviewing property services. So if we take budget first, since the last meeting of this panel, the Council has been advised of most, but not all, of its expected external grant allocations from the government. The figures that we have not yet got are the government's announcement that there would be further COVID grants available to councils, and we don't know the figure for that yet. So for the moment, we are assuming it will be of a similar order to previous grants and distributed in the same way, but we don't have that figure just yet. With the figures that we have had from the government, Andy Rothery and his team have been plugging those into the budget model to rework the assumptions. And I'm pleased to say that they haven't changed very much. There have been some ups and some downs in those figures, but by and large, they are where we expected. Obviously, the imposition of a third lockdown does have some potential implications for the council. It does mean, of course, that the Roman baths and pump rooms and parking income will be lower than expected this year. That's important because the outturn position for this financial year, to some extent, has some influence on the succeeding year. But the expectation at the moment is that the budget will still balance at the end of this year. So that's it, I think, in terms of the budget. We are doing the final topping and tailing now. I think we're before you in a few weeks' time to present on that, and the team are working quite hard to fill in the final few pieces in it. There is a useful LGA briefing paper, which I'm not sure if all members of the panel will have seen, and perhaps that could be circulated if members wish it. It's quite a good summary of what was announced before Christmas. Moving on to property, I think I've said before that we are continuing the work on the property reviews. The Montague Evans work, that is an external look at the way the council administers its property, is due to report to us at some point this month. I can't be more precise than that. I was due to have a meeting with the consultants before Christmas or during the Christmas period, but it was cancelled because I think one of the interviewers was ill, and I haven't been recontacted for an interview. So it's possible there may be some slight delay in that. And I understand that work is underway to appoint an interim manager for the service, and that person will be charged with kind of holding the reins as we move forward on the work that we're doing with the service. So, Chairman, I think that's probably a good point to draw. Those two major pieces of work are still continuing, and of course, you'll all see the product of the budget work. And I have given a commitment to you personally that we will share the property-related work with you and your panel when it is available.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much, Richard, for that update. Could I now take questions from the panel? I don't have any already in chat, so if I see a hand, we'll take that. Right, I'm seeing no questions. Richard, as we get to our work plan, we will discuss the idea of the property report coming in. So I don't know whether you'll be staying till the very end, but our hope is that the panel can, if it doesn't fit in with an ordinary meeting, or the budget meeting is taking all the time, because I think to discuss the property report and the budget in one meeting will be going some. With your agreement, if you can help us, we'll work out whether to have a special meeting slotted in or not. And we'll also respect but accommodate the idea of those elements which have to be in confidential session, but whilst allowing some elements as far as possible into the public domain of scrutiny. But I think it's fair to say the panel does understand the challenges of commercial detailed information given its property leases. Okay, so on that basis, thank you for that, because we as a panel we would like to work with you in not just scrutinizing but looking at policy development out of that report. So thank you. So if there are no more questions after what I've said, I would propose that we move then on, and thank you, Richard. We'll now move to item 8, which is the people strategy. And could I invite Cherry Bennett, one of our Baines Council officers, to introduce the report and give a presentation of between sort of 5 to 10 minutes, please. Are you there and your microphone working, Cherry?
Yeah, hi, Paul, I'm here. Are my slides available? Will they come on the screen?
Can you do that, Michaela? Putting you on the slot.
No, officers have to do that. I can't do that from here.
Now, if nobody else can, I might be able to, but I'm hoping. I've only got them as the public PDF. And if we just have a slight pause here, panel. Mike, are you able to show the slides?
I haven't. If you can make a copy of the slides, I can show them, but I haven't been sent a copy of the slides, Chair.
Cherry, are you able to email Officer Mike Curtis with said slides, please? Oh, there we go. Looks like something's happening. No, it's not.
I'm sorry, I'm just struggling to share my screen.
No, that's okay. We're making good time, everybody. So there we are. Excellent.
Perfect.
Team effort.
Okay. So thank you ever so much for asking me to come and provide you with an update. And my intention is to give you an update on our people strategy, which is from 2020 to 2024. And I thought before I can talk to you about what we've done, I really have to set the scene and give you the background to the last 12 months, really, most of which I'm sure you know. But I feel it's important to make these points that the pandemic has meant we've made good progress with lots of the work that we've done, and it's accelerated our progress in some areas, which we will touch on as I go through the presentation. But equally, we've had a huge effort from all staff. We've all been diverted from our business as usual. We've all been diverted from some of our plans and some of our priorities, because we've had to respond to the emergency that was in front of us. It has been an unprecedented year. There has been a tremendous effort by staff and strong leadership from our senior managers and from other officers. Alongside the pandemic, we've also, within the HR and OD service, but obviously affecting our adult social care teams as well, we've had a large and complex TUPE transfer of around 400 staff and workers from our 3 community residential centres and our 5 extra care facilities. That took effect from the 1st of October and went smoothly, but was a big piece of work and a complex piece of work for us to manage. So it's within this context that I'm talking to you today. So now I'm struggling to move my slides on. Sorry, I think I have a bit of a lag with my screen and Zoom here as well. So I thought it was helpful if I talked to you about the key challenges and risks before I give you an update as well. So we've talked about the context. The key challenges that have been facing our whole workforce are not dissimilar to those that I talked to you about around 18 months ago, but are much more acute now in certain areas than they were then. Our workforce resilience is one of our key risks on our risk register, and we have a number of pieces of work in place to identify those and to put mitigations in place, but it's quite acute for us at the moment, as is the mental health of our workforce, both our frontline workforce and our staff working from home, working remotely, often working in isolation and on their own. We have a number of recruitment challenges in social care, compressed, I think, a little. We expect them to be compressed by the changes in immigration rules, which came into effect from the 1st of January this year. We have yet to see that play out, but I think we need to be cognizant of it. We also have concerns over workforce capacity linked to resilience, but more broadly than that. I hope that we'll be able to get back into a place where we'll be able to do some more long-term workforce planning in the spring and in the summer, but obviously we've been quite reactive and needing to work on a fairly short-term basis over the past year. Technology, again, she talks as she shares her screen, or tries to share her screen, but technology being another issue that we need to make sure that our staff have, certainly our staff working from home, but all our staff have the right equipment and technology they need to do their jobs. So it looks like I need to come out and go back in to move my slides along, which is not helpful. Okay. So I'll talk to you about each of the 5 themes of the people strategy. So do a very brief update in terms of what our key achievements were in the last year and what our plans are for this year. I'm happy to take questions when we get to the end. So if you want more detail on some of the things that I'm mentioning, then please say. So our key achievements in 2020 have been around moving much of our recruitment on in terms of using our digital platforms, so using social media and improving our profile on our website and on Twitter and on LinkedIn. We've moved all our induction processes. Instead of it being an in-person, face-to-face session, it's all moved online, and it had to move online quite rapidly. We've done 4 of our new online inductions already this last year and into this year, and had 50 staff at least go through that process. We've recruited or appointed internally a whole series of staff to act as our digital champions. So we've got 34 new digital champions to work with staff and with officers and members in terms of getting to grips with this new technology that's ahead of us. Our plans for next year include a senior management restructure, which we're about to start in January, ensuring that we have a senior management structure that is fit for purpose and able to deliver against our new corporate plan. We have a significant amount of work to do with our social care teams around recruitment and workforce planning there as we embed the residential services into our wider local government practice. We're very proud of our achievements around apprenticeships. I have the data, but I've lost it with my screen share now, but we've got around 120 apprentices within the council at the moment, which is a very similar figure to the figure we had last year. And considering new start apprentices are harder to do in the current circumstances, we're very proud of that. A number of those, at least half, if not more, are upskilling apprentices. So they're people who already had roles within the council, and they're now going through training as part of being in their job. We intend to embed our values and behaviours in all our recruitment practice, so having stories that really bring our values and behaviours to life in terms of our recruitment information that we put out. We are working hard to launch the government's new Kickstart programme, so we have 6 placements that we're about to start moving through in the next few weeks. And we need to do more work around our data and our metrics around recruitment as well. So we have more work to do there in the next year. So the second theme in the people strategy is around talent and development. Similar to induction, we've moved most of our learning online, and we've done that again at pace over the last few months. There's our apprentice numbers that I touched on. 9 of those 121 apprentices are MBA apprenticeships, both at Bath Spa University and at UWE. We have 3 social work degree apprenticeships that started last year as well. We've been rebranding our learning platform to make it much, much simpler for staff to find the development opportunities that are available to them, and to have that learning as a blended opportunity, so with much more reading and other material available to them as well. Our Springboard Program, which is our women leadership program, we have 4 delegates on the Springboard Program this year. And we think we're about to have at least 1, if not 2 delegates on the Stepping Up programme, which is the leadership programme for BAME staff as well, that runs through Bristol City Council. So we've made real progress, I think, and significant progress on the things that we said we'd do this year. Our plan for next year is to continue with our expansion of our apprenticeship programme, as I touched on before, embed that learning from our MBA cohort. So we have a cohort of middle managers here who are doing this amazing amount of learning, and we really need to focus that. Our first cohort are just starting their long projects, and they're all doing, there's 3 of them, and they're doing work around they're doing topics for the council that we've asked them to work on. So we want to bring that back and make sure that we're using that resource and using that learning as best we can. Again, we want to link our values and behaviours work to the 3 levels of our At My Best development programme. So that's for everyone, for our people managers and for our strategic leaders. So linking behaviours and competencies around our value framework to each of those levels, so that everything feels quite neat and hopefully feels like a logical progression. We also need to do further work on our leadership development programme once the senior management restructure is completed, hopefully by 1st of April. And as directors are confirmed in their posts, then we will start thinking about that director development programme into next year. So talking about our staff engagement and performance work, we've run a number of staff surveys, both a large staff survey that we did in November 2019, but we've also we run 3 pulse surveys during 2020 and during lockdown, asking all staff, including our frontline staff, how they are. The last one we ran was just before Christmas, so we're just about to get the results of that in the next couple of weeks. I think it's fair to say that staff were finding, particularly office-based staff, were finding it easier, and we're enjoying working from home right at the beginning, and like everybody else, it's got much harder and there's more we need to do for them. Again, I'll touch on that in our health and safety and wellbeing update at the end. But we are doing our best to understand the picture of all staff across all our different elements of our workforce, who, some who have come into work every single day, or mostly every single day since lockdown, and others that are working mostly entirely from home and have been shielding and those kinds of circumstances. We have implemented a new staff engagement strategy, and we've recruited or appointed from within our current teams 25 staff engagement representatives. That group meet regularly with Will and with Mandy and have a conversation and feedback, ideas, experiences, comments in terms of how they are finding work here and things that they want to raise. So that's kind of, that work has started this year, and we've got more to do to embed that next year. We have the staff briefing, so we have a staff engagement newsletter that has gone out at least once a week. In the early days of lockdown, it was going out every single day to staff, to keep them informed and to keep staff as well connected as we possibly can do during these circumstances. Staff engagement team have done a huge amount to support that move to virtual working and making sure again that staff feel updated. We have also set up a corporate equality steering group, which we also has member representation, and that, so we've only had 1 meeting so far, but again into next year hopefully that work will start to show as well. So our plan for next year, we have to launch our online performance development conversation system. So we talked about this when I came here 18 months ago. So we've been working quite hard this year to move our paper-based system online so that we will have data and much simpler reporting around objectives and achievement against those objectives and against our corporate plan. So we will be in a position to launch that in April this year. We've been talking about holding a staff conference. Obviously, in the current circumstances, it hasn't been appropriate to do that, and we haven't quite been able to do it online. I don't think we quite have the technology yet, but certainly one way or another this year, we will hold a staff conference of some kind. We want to use those real life stories to help develop our employer brand, both internally and externally. Staff engagement needs to support all our change programs and embed those for the long term. We also want to introduce a staff recognition program as well. So within your papers, you received a more detailed briefing note from Amanda George, who is our Interim Director of Business Recovery. And Amanda is also here and available to take questions at the end as part of our discussion. So I wasn't going to spend too long talking you through the Preparing for the Future programme because you've got the more detailed briefing note. But just key points to note, we're talking about the redesign of the Civic Centre. We're talking about changing the work base for most of our office-based Bath staff over and to make that Keynsham as their work base, and a few will be the Hollies as well. Also to talk about embedding blended working as the norm for us. So thinking beyond flexible working, but thinking about working in a combination of different ways and ways that suit the person, the individual, and also their job role as well. So it won't be a one size fits all proposal. It's got to be flexible, and it has to be flexed to suit the preferences and the working styles and the job roles of the people we're talking about. There's a huge amount of research, and best practice out there that we can learn from other companies. So that's part of what Amanda's doing. So I'll let her talk to that more if you have any questions. We're also working on an IT strategy, a 5-year IT information management strategy for the future, so that again, staff and our customers, our residents, our community are equipped for the future, and that we're providing the right kinds of services for our community.
Excellent. So
okay. I promise you this is my final slide.
That was fine. I wasn't sure if that had been your final.
Yeah, so this is theme number 5. So my final slide is talking about health, safety and well-being. And again, so the current situation, the pandemic has really put, I think, a very sharp focus on health, on safety and on well-being for all our staff in all roles. We have launched an employee wellbeing strategy. We have trained 32 mental health first aiders across the workplace, linking in with our health champions. We've produced a suite of working well from home resources for our back office staff. We expanded our flu voucher programme to cover all staff this year. We've undertaken 1,760 individual risk assessments, working, ensuring that staff, whether they're in the workplace or working from home or doing client visits and site visits, that they are safe in doing so. We've worked on COVID secure workplace risk assessments as well across our depots and all our sites. We've also undertaken compliance reviews around health and safety with all directors, and those reports are due to be fed back to Health and Safety Steering Committee at the end of January this month. And we're also working on a health, safety and wellbeing policy and refreshing that and renewing that because it's due, it's time for us to do that too. We're working on stress policy and coming out of those compliance reviews, making sure we have stress risk assessments in place across our workforce. And we're also looking at the Mind Wellbeing, Workplace Wellbeing Index, and looking at that kind of accreditation and what we need to do there. I think that's enough from me. I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing my screen as well.
Excellent. Well, what I propose we do is we first of all begin by taking questions from the panel. And if you can hold back a sense of debate, when we've finished our questions with Cherry, then if we could go almost like into panel session and discuss then what, if anything, it all adds up to and our views, if that's okay. And Lucy, you've agreed to try and help me draw a line between the two. and make sure we've got time for both. So I'll just quickly look at chat to see if anybody has requested to speak. I've got Councillor Andy Furs and Councillor Warrington in that order. So Andy, would you like to start?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. 2 points really. Thanks, Cherry, for your presentation. Two things come sort of jump out at me. Excuse me. One is the new start apprentices, and it's encouraging to see that there are so many, because one of the challenges for lots of businesses is bringing new people on board. The challenge, I think, is, and I'm just interested in your view, is how we're embedding them into the sort of working environment if they are working from home. I know you said that there are sessions, because a lot of that sort of corporate embedding is done over a chat when you're at the coffee machine or whatever it is, and those things are just not happening. So I'll be interested in your views on that to start with. And the second point is, you mentioned the new sort of regime of home working, not one size fitting all, and I'm interested in your views on how we are dealing with what was the organisations of licensing, because they're out on the street a lot or engaging with businesses a lot. The public realm team, who are all out and about a lot, and we're using Lewis House as a bit of a base, and whether they have similar bases, and equally with the sort of the planning people who are engaging with, developers, planners, and that, slightly different sort of outward facing roles rather than corporate inward roles. So those are the 2 points, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. I will bring Amanda in, I think, to answer your second question, because she's much closer to the detail of that work than I am. But in terms of your first question, so I can answer, I think, some of it, and I can answer some of it based around my own team and how we're working as well. So some of our apprentices obviously are frontline staff apprentices anyway. So some of our new starts have been in those areas where they have been coming into work, and they may be not coming in as much as they might have done. But certainly it has not felt that particularly different. Socially distanced, yes, and COVID secure, yes, of course, but not very different, because things haven't changed there. We have certainly seen less apprentices and less requests for apprenticeships in those areas where staff are based from home 100% and all of their time. But we have had some come in, and again, certainly over the summer, where things were a little easier and we could have some contact. We've also worked quite hard with as part of our induction process and with managers around, you can't recreate that water cooler conversation, but you can create lots of those opportunities. They need to be more planned. It's less spontaneous. Certainly working in this online way is less spontaneous for all of us. But you can put quite a structured program in for our apprentices and give them quite structured time with individuals across the team. Certainly my business support team, where we have an apprentice, started before lockdown, so I should make that clear, but certainly was still relatively new at that point. And we have had other new starts at fairly junior level. We've just put lots of time in for the team to get together with no fixed agenda, to try and kind of help each other with problems and to talk things through. I think one thing we should be very proud of actually here is that our managers are incredibly supportive, and have really thought through how they might work in an online environment and how they might use technology to our advantage, but equally kind of think about things and plan things in a more structured way than maybe we did before. Is it okay if I bring Amanda in to answer Andy's
Thank you, Cherry. That answers the first bit. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. So I think the question was really about what about the sort of public facing staff who still need to be working from Bath city centre. And I think it's probably worth splitting this into what we're doing now and what we will do in the future. So now during the COVID pandemic, and what the plans are for the future once we do eventually come out the other side of this. So what we're doing now, so for instance, the licensing staff, planners, etc., they're doing a mixture of working from their home environments and also working sometime from parts of Lewis House and parts of the Guildhall. So it's still perfectly possible for them to have a base in Bath to be able to work from there. But at the moment, we're obviously trying to encourage as many staff as possible to be travelling from home rather than going into an office building. Having said that, you know, we've had some pressures recently, obviously, with going from tier 2 to tier 3 to national lockdown, where we've needed our licensing team very present in the city centre to ensure enforcement is happening. And so we have temporarily arranged for them to have space on the 4th floor of Lewis House, which is still available at the moment. So they're working from there. So we have put different procedures into place. And I suppose if we're then going to look at the future, so the future will be quite different. So all of those staff will have a change of work base to be Keynsham Civic Centre. And the idea for Keynsham is that that will be where you meet with your teams and you have collaboration sessions, you have team meetings. If you are still doing an individual piece of work or going out doing a visit, then you can work from elsewhere. So you might choose to work from home, or you might choose to use a desk in the Guildhall, because we will be kitting out the Guildhall with hot desking opportunities. But we're also talking to our partners as well in Bath, so various other public sector organisations where we're hoping to come up with a reciprocal arrangement, so they allow us to use some of their desks sometimes and they can come to Keynsham and use some of ours. So there are a variety of different things going on, but I think the very short answer is it's perfectly possible for people still to be able to work from Bath City Centre.
Thank you, Amanda.
Excellent. Next speaker is Karen Warrington.
Yeah, and apologies, I've got a few questions, but thank you for that presentation, Cherry. I mean, I recognise that some of the projects that you've been dealing with, especially with the 2P, is very, very large. Hopefully my questions aren't too in depth, but I just wondered whether you had looked at succession planning in with your talent development. Is that part of it, or is that a separate project that you're going to look at? Because clearly we've lost some senior staff that I know a number of councillors were and residents were concerned about. With regard to the surveys, clearly my background sort of leans me towards that, but I wondered whether we might see some summaries at some stage. I think that would be very helpful. And I just wondered what tactics that you are that you've looked at for the recruitment challenges around the social care, especially now that, you know, a number of people in places like hospitality potentially have been made redundant, whether we can tap into that market, and whether there's potentially an educational aspect. People don't necessarily think of social care as a career path, but I mean I've known a number of people who've used it as a career path into nursing. So I wondered what your tactics are on that. And then my last question, which we talked about the last time that you came to this panel, and there was a perception amongst the managers that there was a lack of staff. And we talked about the possibility of whether that was a perception or whether that was reality, and whether we would be able to do a gap analysis. And I know that that's going to be pretty difficult in the circumstances that we've found ourselves in the last sort of 10, 11 months, but whether that was still something that was on the table. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, certainly, I think some, if not most, of what you've raised have been projects that I think in normal times I would have liked to have been able to come back and say, oh yes, we've started this, or we've done this piece of work. So certainly around succession planning, that's again referencing the piece I said about workforce planning and us picking that up in earnest. I think when the worst of this, if this is the worst, and we don't know that obviously at the moment, in terms of our workforce planning and allocation of staff, when we work through that. So I hope that we'll pick up succession planning during this year, and really start to work on that in earnest. And I think that succession planning and the gap analysis around the capacity, both of those need to be picked up kind of together, because they are two sides of a similar, or if not the same coin, I think. So certainly I think we will pick, as I say, pick that up in the summer. So no, as it stands at the moment, we haven't made very much progress on that at all. Very happy to share some summaries of the staff survey. They are on our intranet pages, which I don't know if you can see or not, but if not, I'll make sure that you get the link and we'll share those with you. So all the results are there transparently for staff and for members to see. But I'll make sure that you have access. I'll send them across, certainly. Your points about recruitment challenges in social care are very pertinent, I think. I've literally been working this morning there were emails coming through saying we need help, we need to think about reallocation, certainly right now. So not necessarily recruitment, but to cope with the pandemic as it stands. We know that we are struggling, as the NHS are struggling. We have a number of staff who are self-isolating or unwell, and we are struggling to cope, and we need to maintain our services and maintain a safe service. So we are doing very urgent work around that, but we definitely have a longer piece around campaigns locally. I think you're absolutely right. I think the employment market hopefully should be in our favour, more than it necessarily maybe has done in the past few years. We've been working quite closely with colleagues at BSW, so Baines, Swindon and Wiltshire, CCG, and the directors of HR across the NHS trusts and across the 3 local authorities have been working together to talk about things like career development. And again, all the best laid plans. I think we'd had some really healthy, good conversations, and then we're just in response mode at the moment. We're responding to a crisis. I don't know, again, if I can bring Amanda in for question 4 around capacity. So yes, in terms of the longer term, we haven't undertaken any significant restructure and redundancy, as you know, this year. And there are not plans afoot to do anything significant in terms of next year either. Some restructuring of our services, yes, but not large redundancy programs as far as I'm aware. But Amanda has been leading our business continuity work, and we've been doing some work since been back last week. So since lockdown was announced, or in fact just before lockdown was announced on Monday evening, she started it on Monday morning to think about that. So I don't know if you just want to give a brief update on your business continuity and capacity planning there, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, yes. The whole business continuity piece obviously is becoming increasingly more important as we go further into lockdown and as we encounter winter pressures. For the last few weeks, probably from November actually, we've been meeting every Monday morning with a group of heads of service from across our critical service areas, just to check the state of our services and how we're performing, and to try and plug gaps where they might appear. And they're appearing for a number of different reasons, not least that we have some staff off sick with COVID. We have that then creates a knock-on effect. So if they're in a front-line service where they have had to work closely with their colleagues, that then means a significant number of people have to self-isolate as well. So if I give you an example, we've got some pressures in our park service at the moment and in our waste service. Obviously key frontline services that we need to continue to deliver, but we have a number of staffing pressures. So the meetings, the aim of the meetings really on a Monday morning is to have a discussion around how we can reallocate staff. So you'll be aware that we have had to close the Roman Baths as a visitor attraction, and we therefore have quite a number of staff who are able to be reallocated to doing other work. Now, it can't be possible everywhere because some of the work that we need them to do is skilled and they're not trained to do it. But where we can, we are reallocating those heritage services staff to be able to support frontline operation. So for instance, we have some who've been reallocated to doing the business grants, so allocating business grants, which has become increasingly complex over the last few weeks with a number of different grants available. We have some supporting the community wellbeing hub with doing food deliveries and speaking to our clinically extremely vulnerable residents. So there is a reallocation piece going on. It is an ever-changing sea, really, where we are trying to be as proactive as we possibly can. But at this precise moment, reactive is where we are. And there is a piece about looking into the future about how we create greater resilience in our workforce, which is something that the Business Continuity Group are looking at.
Okay, Karen, are you happy with all those answers? Has that covered everything that you wanted? Yeah.
Yes, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those very full answers. And Lucy.
Hello. I've got some more questions, predominantly from Andrew George, about the preparing for the future programme. I just wanted to be clear about, I don't know whether you can say this generally, but what proportion of the working week will council officers generally be expecting to be working from home with this new programme? It was the two statements where we say the principle with the new space is it's mainly for team collaboration, and if you have a discrete piece of work to do which does not involve others, you do that at home. And also that, again, the intention is to create a workspace staff want to go to on occasions that they are able to book the space. The rest of the time, the staff will work flexibly, either from home or using community space. So I just wondered generally on average how much more home working you're expecting. And also I wondered whether the experience of the last year and the additional support that's been needed for wellbeing and the wellbeing of the workforce would prompted anyone to think about looking again at that element of the strategy. I also just specific questions. I wondered if anyone's sort of costing the extra input into help, workforce wellbeing and the amount of support work that's going on. Also the analysis of a change to travel arrangements. I wonder if that's been done, because the policies, you know, one of the main gains from it seems to be an assumed reduction in need to travel to work. But I wonder if that is really the case, you know, particularly for people that are working and living in the villages and towns outside Bath, and they won't have the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is good to get to Keynsham as it is to get into Bath. And finally, I had a couple of questions from other council officers. They asked me to bring forward St Martin's. When the council staff first moved to St Martin's, it was supposed to improve the integration between the CCG and social care. Will the CCG staff also be moving to Keynsham? So will that synergy be lost, or will it be retained in some way? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll try and answer them all. I think I've jotted them all down, but please do let me know if I'm not giving you everything you need. So the first part of it was really what proportion of the working week will staff be working from home and or going into Keynsham Civic Centre. Now, I think it's important not to broad brush this one, because this will be quite individual. So for some staff, we know that a proportion of time working from home will absolutely suit them. And we have the staff survey results of the last couple of staff surveys, and then the most recent one that we're waiting for, which do show that the last staff survey results, 85% of people wanted to continue to be able to work from home for some of their working week. And actually only 6% of staff said they really can't see that happening in the future. So we know that there is a real desire out there for a better work-life balance, from being able to have a choice about where you work. And I think it's important to understand that at the moment, we don't have a choice. And that is the most difficult part of this whole, the COVID pandemic, is that our choice is being entirely removed. So we are having to say to staff, the national government guidance is you must work from home if you possibly can. So you don't have a choice. And we've all been stuck at home for the last 9-10 months, not being able to really see into the future about how it might work. So the point in the future is that you will have a choice, and it will not be a broad brush. You can only attend Keynsham 2 days a week, for instance. It will be very much up to your individual circumstances, but there will be a general principle to be followed, and that general principle will be that if you need to and want to see your team and have a team meeting and collaborate with other teams to work together on a project, then the space will be absolutely perfect for you in Keynsham. If you've got a piece of work where you're looking at a spreadsheet or doing a report and you need peace and quiet, you might find it easier to do that elsewhere. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do it from home, because we are investigating other options as well about how people might work flexibly. So it's important, I think, to remember that flexible working doesn't mean home or office. It means home or elsewhere and office. And the elsewhere might be arrangements that we come up with our partners. So we have been speaking to partners such as the CCG, Virgin Care, Curo, other local authorities to see whether we can have a reciprocal arrangement whereby we're able to use some of their desks and they're able to use some of ours on occasion. And there'll have to be a booking mechanism to allow that to happen. But that does mean that for people who, for instance, live in Wiltshire and nearer Trowbridge than they do Keynsham, it would be much better for them from a commuting point of view, from a green and emergency climate point of view, for them to go to Trowbridge rather than to trail over to Keynsham. So coming back to your original question, how often? On average, I think probably 2 or 3 days a week people will be accessing an office. There will be some who need to access more than that, and there'll be some who are very happy to access fewer. And we will be able to determine that once we put a booking system into place. You asked about the well-being of the workforce and whether that's been taken into account. And I'd say it's being taken into account all the way through this project. It's one of the major key drivers of this project, actually, is to create an environment fit for the future where staff have a choice about where they work and they have a choice about when they work and how they work. So part of this project is about giving people the right IT equipment to enable them to have a flexible approach to work. So we know that some job roles, you have to work 9 to 5. That's a given. You're dealing with customers, you're expected to be available at that time. But there are other job roles where you won't necessarily need to do that. And it is about that two-way contract, really, between us as an employer and the employee, and about coming up with just different ways that we may be able to achieve the outcomes that we need. So it's not managing by presenteeism, it's managing by outcomes. The cost of wellbeing, I'll let Cherry answer, because we do have all sorts of sort of processes in place where our staff can access support to help them with wellbeing, particularly at this time. The other thing that you asked was the change to travel arrangements and whether we're taking into account where people live, etc. There is a piece of work that we will be doing about plotting where people live and how they get to work, and whether that actually does add up to a lower carbon footprint than before. I sincerely believe it will, because we had a lot of staff who came into Keynsham 5 days a week, regardless of where they lived, and they won't be doing that so much in the future. So I'm expecting to see a benefit there, but there is work going on that, and we are talking to our Sustainable Transport Officer, and he's part of one of our working groups. So there is work going on with that. And finally, you asked about St Martin's and integration with the CCG. I've had lots of conversations with the CCG, and we are committed to finding working arrangements where our staff and the CCG staff can continue to work together, interact and collaborate. They'll certainly be able to use our partnership space that we want to create in Keynsham. And we have been talking to them about us using some of their space as well, wherever that might be in this district. So yes, the commitment is still there. I'm hoping that I've covered it all.
Yeah.
So just to add to 2 things. Firstly, in terms of the travel savings of this year, you'll see in the budget there's a line for 150,000 of staff travel savings. That saving, we were just reviewing them last week, and that savings line will be met this year. It hasn't been met in previous years, so there's one piece. Around the cost of wellbeing, we haven't done a specific costing exercise, but I would say that most of the work we are doing is things that we wanted to do anyway. So I think the pandemic has in some ways helped us and accelerated some of what we would have liked to have been doing. We already employed a wellbeing officer as part of our health, safety and wellbeing team. So that was very fortunate. So Jess Broderick has been in our team for 18 months or so. So we were already ahead slightly in that sense. We have a strong EAP provision, and that's a fixed cost. So even though we've accessed it more this year, we haven't had to pay more for that. Same with occupational health, and our occupational health service have given some really good and really helpful webinars and resources that both for us as professionals, but also available for all staff as well. There's more I could talk about, but I don't think we have time. But it's there.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. I've got Alistair, Mark, Winston, and Sean. So if obviously everybody can have their time for questions, but if we can try and be a bit more concise on the answers. I know you've been very full, but we're open to end at least by 6, and we could be here many hours longer if we carry on at this rate. But having said that, rest assured, those 4 speakers, you will get your question time. So Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. And Cherry, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I shall be brief. A couple of questions. Developing on Karen's one about recruitment, but outside the social care area. It is a good time in the employment market at present to be recruiting. Are we seeing that in interest in council jobs? Are we seeing people coming proactively to try and work with Baines at this time? And the second one is I note the mention of a staff recognition and thank you scheme, and I'd be interested in a little more detail of that, because I do remember that when the initial ones were introduced in Whitehall, they proved quite divisive, and it may need to be handled carefully, but I'm sure it would be. But more detail, please.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. So the very simple answer to your first question is yes. I can give an example from my own team where a part-time HR role that we'd normally receive maybe sort of 15 applications for, we got 64. Wow. So there's a good example. It's part-time, so attractive in that sense, but unusual for us. We also know in our construction, so our project managers for our construction teams, notoriously difficult to fill, notoriously hard for us to match market pay. And yet we have recruited a significant number of excellent candidates to work on some of the projects and to fill some of the vacancies we had. So yeah, I've certainly got 2 very quick, clear examples to give you there. I'm sure there are others as well. Thank you. I note your comments about the staff recognition scheme. It's one of the reasons we've always had our annual scheme that we link with our community awards. So we've kept them together. And so we have the community awards and our employer awards together. But I think it's annual and it's possibly not enough, particularly given, what everyone has gone through in the last year. So the thank you scheme, we just want to keep that really quite simple and it's as basic as encouraging managers and giving them more tools and resources to simply say thank you to their staff and to just do it more. In terms of recognition, we are thinking about a monthly recognition scheme, so making it more frequent and having criteria, but fairly loose criteria to nominate individuals or teams or both, and keep it at directorate level as well. So possibly not make it council-wide, or just make the results council-wide, but not the scheme itself council-wide. So yes, thank you for your feedback. Brilliant. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it, Alistair? Yeah. If I could invite Mark now to put your question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. I'll try and be brief. I've got 2 questions which are different areas. One, you mentioned the 9 MBA apprentices. I'm interested in how the council is going to make sure that they get value out of that work, because obviously that's a fantastic investment in those people. But obviously those MBA projects, I would hope, would be useful to the council as well. So interested in your views on that. And the other question, or possibly just a point I'd like to make is that I applaud the principle of the offering much more flexible working and the working from home combined with the office space. I think that's a very good thing to offer. In my experience, I think the most difficult thing to manage is not when everybody's at home or when everybody's in the office, but when there is a combination of that and how you deal with hybrid meetings where some people are at home and some people are in the office. It seems to me, the technology is difficult, and for that, I just wondered if you've got any thoughts about how that's going to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So again, very, very briefly, so our MBA students are in three 3 cohorts at Bath Spa, but we also have 2 others on different cohorts at UE. So they're all at slightly different stages, and there's some slightly different content there as well. But certainly their big projects that they have to do at the end of the year are employer-sponsored ones. So we sign off on the project itself. When I say we, that's the senior leadership team. And we also expect none of them have got there yet, but when they've completed their project, we hope to get them back to do at least a presentation for us on those. I can't remember any of the areas usefully off the top of my head. I know one of the projects is around COVID and our response to COVID. I think one of them was around our performance framework as well. Our next cohort are not quite there yet. In terms of the ongoing work they're doing, we have fairly regular conversations with them, very conscious that we're possibly not doing enough to embed their learning. So we are going to be inviting them back. So they've all just done projects, shorter pieces around HR and staff engagement. So the obvious thing is to get them to come in and present that work back to me and to colleagues so that we can listen to what they have to say. I'm hoping one of them might have done some work on a staff recognition scheme as well, so it might just tie in quite nicely. They have more freedom over what they research for those projects, but certainly to bring that learning back to the senior leadership team, to the wider corporate management team, and to give them a chance to show their colleagues what they've learned as well, and to demonstrate that learning. I'll let Amanda answer your second question.
Thanks, Cherry. So yeah, the short answer is we are looking at that. I do completely understand that hybrid meetings are not that easy. We are working with IT on the various different options. Obviously, our collaboration spaces that we are going to be developing will have screens, webcams, etc., to enable that to happen. But I suppose what I'd also say is that there is so much going on in this area at the moment, because so many organisations are doing similar things to us. That I'm expecting to see technological advances quite rapidly in this area. So it's a case of watching this space.
Thank you. I agree with that. I just think it's not there yet.
Okay, you happy there, Mark? If I can move to Winston now.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just what Amanda was saying about the community and partnership space. And it looks as if a lot of attention's being given to that, because the survey figures are quite revealing. 85% wanting to work more from home. It's the other 6%, and in fact, arithmetically, it's 15% who didn't answer the 85%. And some of those just can't. You know, they're having to share a bedroom or work out of that, and then the kids and everything else. And it's not helpful for their lack of routine as well. I'm finding in other organisations that we got through the first lockdown, but now people are struggling with this loss of routine, and they're struggling about switching on and switching off. And I think some of that is that they do need another space apart from that home environment. And if that isn't going to be available all the time in the old office, then it puts an even greater premium on 2 things. A, where those community and partnership spaces are, but drilling down to the detail of each individual. Because each individual's circumstances is different.
Yes, and I think managers will have a key part to play with that, because it will be for managers to determine with their teams how this is going to operate. So they will know which members of staff need greater support with a working environment than others, and there will have to be an arrangement put into place with management teams on how that's going to work in practice. As I say, you know, we are committed to looking at partnership space, but also just to remind you, in the Guildhall, we will be, you know, most of the office-based staff will be coming out of the Guildhall, and we'll be emptying that to create a number of hot desking opportunities in Bath City Centre as well. So staff will have various options about where to work from. It won't just be home or Keynsham.
Okay, and then I've got Sean finally.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of concerns. The first one is that we seem to be making a lot of changes before we've got an alternative tried and tested infrastructure in place. We've yet to actually, from what I can see, make Keynsham fit for purpose for this new role that it's going to undertake. So I'm concerned. I mean, firstly, do you think that closing Lewis House was premature, and perhaps we should have put an infrastructure in place before we started shutting down our existing facilities? I mean, I know you talked about reciprocal arrangements, but as of yet, it sounds as if there are none in place. There are no agreements. So, so that's my first concern. Secondly, following on from what Winston said, can you confirm that anyone that wants a permanent office position can have one? Or is it going to be a case if they don't have a choice? I appreciate that if 86% of people have said currently that they like working from home, but that can change. I mean, it's been an unusual year, and their circumstances after lockdown could change quite dramatically. So will we be actually offering people, if they want them, permanent office positions?
So I think that there will be a variety of different scenarios here, won't there? And I think that if you absolutely cannot work from home because your home isn't suitable for you to work, maybe you're sharing with somebody else, maybe you don't have the right kit, broadband, or whatever it might be, then we absolutely do understand that there will be some people who cannot work from home, which is why we're trying to come up with other options for them. It doesn't mean that there will always be a desk for them 5 days a week in Keynsham, but there will be other options. So as I said, there will be space in the Guildhall. You know, there's even, we are going to be looking at the possibility with libraries as well. So there will be some options for them, but there will be some flexibility required for the majority of people. And I think what I just remind you as well is that a large number of people were working from home at least 1 or 2 days a week before this happened. So it's not new. So there were some pockets of teams that did not embrace flexible working at all and just basically wouldn't do it. COVID has opened our eyes to the possibility that it can happen, and people who said in the past they could never work from home are now happily working from home. As I said before, once we give people back the element of choice, I think it will be a significantly different picture than at the moment, where people really are struggling at home all of the time. So yes, it's not tried and tested, but we do know that we've got a workforce who want to be flexible in the future, and we're committed to making that happen.
So the answer to whether permanent positions can be given is no. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's a conversation to be had, because there are so many different individual circumstances. I certainly wouldn't say no. That would never happen. If there was, you know, a special circumstance that meant that we would need to create some space for a certain number of staff in Keynsham 5 days a week, that's perfectly possible to do. So I wouldn't rule it out. I just I feel that opening the door on that is a little dangerous. So we just need to have that flexibility available, and absolutely it's never going to be a blanket decision that nobody is able to work there 5 days a week.
Okay, I just wouldn't want people's personal circumstances to be career limiting, and that's the way it seems to be heading.
No, and I would also say, from a health and safety perspective, I don't want anyone's personal circumstances to put their health, safety, or well-being at risk either. We have a duty of care to all our staff, obviously, and for some individuals that will be a higher threshold than for others as well. So of course we have to take that into account.
Okay, that's the end of the questions. If I could now draw this together and now invite the panel members to really draw together what we've sort of seen and heard, not so much into questions as to what, if anything, do we want to conclude, comment, resolve? Does anybody wish to open the debate as such? And it's absolutely fine if nobody wants a debate, but I'm making this opportunity available. So Karen.
Yeah, I'm very pleased that we're looking at this holistically. We're obviously in a very difficult situation with the pandemic. We don't know how long it's going to last. I think there are opportunities here, as have been mentioned, looking at the resilience, looking at the BCP. So I think some of those are going to be very pertinent, just in terms of basically managing this going forward, because we don't know whether that's going to last into the autumn or even longer, and then just planning for the future, but not taking those things off. So I think for me the gratifying bit is that holistic approach in terms of all the HR issues, and the business resilience. I think that's a really good way forward.
Does anybody else have any comments or things they wish to? Yes, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to see some timescales attached to this, particularly in terms of putting in place infrastructure, IT infrastructure, office infrastructure. I'd like to see some timescale, particularly say Keynsham, which seems to be key to a lot of the schemes that we're looking at. It doesn't seem that much has happened in Keynsham over the last 6 months to adapt to this new world. So it would be interesting to know what sort of timescales we're talking about.
Okay. I've got Lucy next.
I think also in this discussion we haven't talked about the cost of the refurbishment of Keynsham Centre. It hasn't come in here. My understanding it's 1.65 million bid for work at Keynsham, and I think we need to have more of a discussion on this issue. It's maybe Richard Samuel and Andy Rothery could come in. That's a capital bid for next year to increase its capacity. And I'm concerned that the emphasis, that we get too hung up on this 85% figure. I'm sure officers have said to me, if someone says to me, do I want a bit of flexibility in my working environment? Of course, I'm going to say yes. That doesn't mean I want to be working at home 3 days out of 5 of the week, and that is, and I think also when you say it brings in more flexibility, the language used was, if you absolutely cannot work from home, we'll find somewhere for you. So that's really, I think, where I think this will affect lower paid workers that have, that don't have so much say in how their job is going to look. And I'm concerned about that. Lower income, younger age workers who are really going to miss out, and I think it will affect their working opportunities. There was a letter in the Times actually the week that we saw the Lewis House announcement on the media statement. It was from a young adult that lives in Bath, and he said, in terms of I think this is interesting, in terms of recruitment, officers have said to me they'll be looking for jobs elsewhere where they will get an office, and he says, I am looking for companies that are encouraging employers to return to the office. From my perspective, there are many negatives to home working. It's hard to establish yourself, even more so to learn from your superiors. It's difficult to develop relationships and contacts. And as a result, it's hard to imagine a situation in which those working from home would not suffer from lower prospects of advancement. And I think those are all very good points. I'll just leave it there.
Okay. I've got Winston next.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I think Amanda and Cherry have demonstrated they're looking at this from all aspects, and they're taking it very seriously, and they understand the nature of just what an extraordinary period we're in. I think also, one of the comments that I think Will made publicly back in, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, is that when he had come in the first year, he'd seen us, that the council can at times work in silos. And I think we've got to be very careful about that with the pandemic, that there are now, unless we get it right, there's a potential for personal silos, sectional silos, and departmental silos. So, and I think Amanda, came up with the answer there, that, or it may have been Cherry, that it really puts a premium on excellent management. We have to be even better at management than we were before, and certainly senior management. I think the only comment that worried me in the whole of the papers I read was this phrase, work is what you do, not a place you go. Got to be careful with that, because it isn't, in terms of output, work is, but work's an experience. It's a social experience, it's a psychological experience, it's a release from the home environment. It's a lot more than just what you do. So all I'd say is, well done, fantastic effort, a lot of thought into this, very professional, but do be careful about that particular phrase.
Okay, now that was our last "May I speak" comment. That summarises into some concern over we'd like some more detail on timescales. There was reference made to cost. There was concern over issue of seeing working from home and the impacts on certain members of our workforce stroke society, and dangers of silo working and where that could take us. Members, does that add up to anything other than feedback to our officers, or do we want to resolve to do something, to do more work? Would you be happy if, for example, I proposed that we asked officers to consider those four main factors in their work, and that we bring this back, you know, maybe in 6 months to see how we're getting on? I'm trying to sort of draw it together. Karen?
Yeah, Chair, I would second that. I suspect that some of those issues are being bundled up anyway, as per my, you know, the holistic approach that clearly is being taken. So I would second that.
So if there are no other suggestions, the officers have heard it. We've minuted our comments and questions that you've made. Could I now put that to the vote? Nobody's going to feel disenfranchised if we try and pull this together. So it's been forwarded and seconded that we ask officers to note this, and we look to, you know, get a report back, say, in 6 months' time. Yeah, subject to, you know, what is suitable. Yeah. So could I have a show of all those in favour of that, please? Yes, I think that's unanimous. And I'd like to thank, I've let that go on as your chair for quite a while, because I sense that we've not had so many questions on a subject, and, you know, without overdoing it, they were all very good and detailed questions, and thank you to the officers for responding on that. We now have to get through the rest of the meeting in the time available. So I therefore propose that we move on, and I invite Officer Mandy Bishop to introduce the report on out-servicing of our services. And whilst in no way looking to restrict you, I think you did assure me that you were optimistic you could do this in about 5 minutes, Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick reminder, this panel's previously had a presentation from the Head of Strategic Procurement and Commissioning, who updated on procurement activity during the last year, particularly during the COVID arrangements, but also gave you some detail on revenue and capital external spend. As a result of that, you wanted a little bit more information about sort of decision making around different types of delivery models, and just to get a flavour for how some of that spend was allocated. So the key three key areas, as the report says, are around health and social care spend, which is by far the biggest spend for the authority, and the health element is obviously jointly in conjunction with the clinical commissioning group. Construction and buildings, which is usually through frameworks and tendered works, which won't surprise you, and then the highways and transport contracts, which includes things like street lighting and electrical work as well. So I wasn't going to actually go through the report in any detail, because you can see the sort of the pros and cons of the arrangements. If anybody does want more on detail on different types of delivery models, you can find that on the .gov.uk website. There's some useful information. I think it's fair to say, when you're looking at sort of models of delivery, there's two elements. If the decision is made not to deliver something in-house, whilst an authority can discharge its functions, actually the legal duty remains often with the local authority. So what I wanted to do today really was just bring members' attention to section 3.7 of the report. Because that really takes us through the rationale of a new provider, because a different type of provision. When people often jump to conclusions around delivery models, but actually there's a whole range of ways we need to actually think and go, and questions we need to ask ourselves. So there are two overarching aims, certainly from an officer and an authority's point of view, when we're looking at what the future delivery model for any service is. One of those is about either supporting the continuation of service or getting service improvement. And that's been particularly relevant, as I'm sure you appreciate, in the last 10 years as finances have become more constrained. And that's often the case with discretionary and commercial services where alternative delivery models are considered. We're also under an obligation to sort of ensure value for money for the taxpayer. It goes without saying, and any sort of model and service delivery needs to take into account those two aspects. But I think the really important thing for me is to look at the criteria we consider when we're deciding whether to continue to deliver something in-house or through another route. And it will be dependent on those number of factors that I've listed there. So I think firstly, understanding and clarity of what is our core business, and that's a really important one between officers and members to think about. So there are some areas and some local authorities where services have been deprioritised, particularly around discretionary activity, and there's been a focus of their limited funding on other areas of work. I think understanding how your delivery model aligns with priorities, and we've got a strong corporate plan now that clearly sets out our priorities as well. I think perhaps more importantly, the available of revenue and capital funding arrangements. And we've been very fortunate in this organisation that in the past, we have actually had quite a lot of access to capital funding. That's not necessarily the case in the future. And we need to consider how delivery arrangements and what the capital needs are moving forward, not just the revenue needs, which tends to get a lot of the focus, particularly in local authority services. So there are some areas that we need to look at where perhaps capital funding will always be quite a low priority. And in order to keep the business relevant and developing, we will need to look at potential other capital funding sources. And you will see a lot of contracts now, local authority contracts, that are at least 7 to 10 years, some that go up to 25 years, because that's basically the minimum time period which any supplier, whether it's a community-based company or it's actually a private sector company, would want to see in place to get the return on any significant capital investment. Our leisure contract's a really good example of that, because we've actually got a 25-year contract with the leisure provider. It's also about the opportunity to lever in additional funding. So there are often other bodies, either through a private sector provider or a community provider, that can access grant funding that we as an organisation wouldn't be able to access. So that's something we need to bear in mind. And also looking at our in-house resources, capability and skill sets. And Cherry and Amanda have spoken through some of the changes around our HR and our accommodation and the sort of resourcing and how people will work in the future and the sort of skills we need from our employees. The other thing that often gets missed is about the maturity of the supply chain as well, if a decision is to actually explore external markets in some way. And often we end up in a position where we haven't got mature markets of suppliers, which obviously does essentially make it quite difficult to look at different delivery models, because it doesn't allow us to sort of get some competition in the cost model that we would like to adopt. And people often think that, if we offer a service or we offer a function to a different type of arrangement, like I say, whether it's either community, mutuals, etc., or as private sector, that people will actually want to deliver what we've got to offer. Often, it's very competitive now. And I know the private sector, for example, is actually very, very particular on the tenders that it does actually submit across local authorities, because there are a lot of people looking at different delivery models, and it does cost a lot of money to actually tender for some of these opportunities, that they are actually quite picky. And some of that is not just about what we would like to discuss with the market, but equally how easy we are to work with as well. And that is becoming increasingly more important. As I said as well, it's also about our own internal abilities to respond to market conditions and local community needs. And often there are other communities or other providers that are best placed to be more agile than we are able to do so. And then next to us, some that I often discuss with members, which is about how much risk are we prepared to accept and how much risk do we wish to transfer? And lastly, the level of control that we wish to retain or relinquish. And that's often a discussion, that there's regular discussions with members around those elements of the aspects of our services as well. And I know members are often quite concerned around that if we do look at a different delivery model, that we will be in a position that we lose control. So I know that's something that's very important to you as member cross-party. That is something early on in to discussions that you do like to have with officers if we're looking at potential alternative delivery models. Like I said, Chair, I'm not going to go into the details about outsourcing, joint ventures, social enterprises. You can see I've put quite a lot of information in there about advantages, disadvantages of each model and the types of services that sometimes and functions that are transferred to alternative bodies to deliver arrangements. I think it's fair to say, to finalise, that we've actually got quite a lot of different arrangements in place. So we have got some joint arrangements with other public sector providers that I've listed. We've got some contractual relationships with private sector providers, and equally I know many of you are aware of some of the community arrangements that we've got in place, or with social enterprises. So at the moment we've got quite a pragmatic approach depending on what we're trying to deliver out of those services and those functions. I'll finish there. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. So on that basis, does anybody have any questions for Mandy? Sean.
Hi, Mandy. Yeah, I'm just wondering how, in the current climate, we're supporting these contract companies that we've outsourced to. Do we have a? I mean, I know that I've seen quite a few comments from the companies within our leisure industry saying they're not seeing a lot of support from the council. So what have we got in place to try and help them in this situation?
It depends who they are, to be honest, Sean. It's a bit like the last question, so some of the questions you previously asked on the previous item. So if you've got something like our highways and transport providers, very little support. Has been quite minimal, actually, because their arrangements are in place. They've continued to work. With regard to things like the leisure providers, as you said, intimated, you know, it's been an ongoing risk nationally around leisure providers. I'm pleased to say that I've worked with all the sort of social enterprise providers that work with local authorities, and ours, you know, whilst it's very challenging, are probably the biggest providers, so probably the most robust. We have been providing some financial support, and we are just about to access ourselves grants that have become available for government for the local authority as well. They've accessed whatever arrangements they can, the leisure provider, and they've actually furloughed staff and done a whole range of things as well, and obviously are looking at their credit lines as well. So it does very much vary. In the social care side, obviously much of our arrangements are delivered either through working with care homes or care providers, and also with our transport providers, and there have been certain support arrangements being put in place. Early on in the pandemic, a procurement note was issued around guidance and advice to local authorities on how to support those providers. So there's quite a detailed note and quite detailed criteria we go through as well.
Okay, are you happy with that, Sean?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking of, for an example, Dragonfly Leisure, who have invested £1.5 million in our assets in the last 5 years, and seem to be lacking any sort of council support in the current climate.
So we have been, you know, we have been talking to them around it. They are obviously, because we transferred that service and that function quite some time ago now, didn't we? That we are talking to Dragonfly Leisure as well to see what other support, and we have talked to them about accessing some Sport England consultancy funding as well, Sean, that was available to help leisure providers at this difficult time, and the council actually accessed that through Sport England, but we did actually offer that as an arrangement as well. So we are regularly trying to work with them to see what we can do. We've not offered any direct financial support, as you said, because it's been quite challenging with the council to support our existing leisure providers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if I've got no more questions, I believe. Michaela, we don't need to take a vote or do anything on this. We've just listened to it. Is that correct? We don't need to resolve anything.
Yeah, you're
so
just
on that basis, Mandy, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and we'll now move on to the next agenda item, which is the council company accounts. Okay. If I could invite Council Officer Andy Rothery to introduce the report, please, and then we'll take questions from members of the panel. So, Andy, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Councillor Samuel was just going to give a brief introduction and then
hand this item over to both myself and Tim Richards, the Aqueous Managing Director.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I think all I was going to say is just to remind the panel that these are audited accounts for 1920. So whatever members think about the current position, which obviously will not be reported until the end of this financial year, just remember we are looking at the closure of the accounts for 1920. When clearly we were in a very different economic environment than what we're in now. So, if there are any questions on the detail of the accounts, I'm sure Andy and colleagues will be able to answer those for the panel. So that's all I want to say by way of introduction.
Thank you, Richard. And just to add to that, I'll give a bit of a council perspective and then hand over to Tim to talk through the company performance in the accounts. I think, as Richard said, this is a look backwards at 1920. I think what's really encouraging to see in the report is the performance improvement in Aqueous from turnover from key developments being taken forwards. I think really what that shows from a council perspective is how this relationship's worked with Aqueous paying a dividend to the council. So that's part of our annual budget plan. So money paid to the council from the revenue created within the company. And we've also earned interest because with the arrangement with Aqueous as a separate company, we have to set up a commercial loan to Aqueous for money that the council loans Aqueous to invest in its developments. So what that creates is a revenue income into our financial plan. That's been met, so the report's details it's around £600,000 last year, and this year it's also been achieved, which is really positive because a lot of the council's income in this year due to COVID has been at high risks, but this is an area where income's being sustained. So I just want to really make that positive point. And I think on that note, I'll hand over to Tim to talk through a bit more of the detail of the performance of the 1920 accounts.
Could I just come in, Tim? Do you have a rough estimate as to how long you would need? I was working on 5 minutes for all this slot, and we've got 3, which is delightful of you. Do you think you can bring this in 3 or 4 minutes?
I'll do my best, Paul. I'll do my best.
As long as you're not launching with the expectation of an hour, that's all I wanted to do.
No, I'm not expecting an hour, so a few minutes should be fine. Thank you, Andy. Well, I'll just really talk about both the companies very quickly. So ADL is Bain's wholly managed development company, and you have accounts in front of you for ADL and its subsidiary ACL. So ACL is 100% owned by Bain's. So in effect, they're all Bain's council companies. And they do 2 different things. So ADL looks after the rental properties. So these are the properties we take predominantly above shops that we refurbish and then put into the private rented market. And ACL is the development company that delivers the housing developments for the council. ADL has been running now for about 3 years, and we have 39 rental units as at the 31st of March 2020. The company delivered a profit of about £250,000, but that included some adjustments to do with pensions, and to do with revaluation of properties. And when you strip that out, the net profit was £24,000. We delivered £380,000 of capital return to the council for ADL for the 3 properties that were transferred during the year. And we delivered about £90,000 in revenue to the council through the commercial interest on the loans. ADL also received a transfer agreement from the council on the 1st of February. So up until the 1st of February 2020, all the staff that were running and operating in ADL were employed by the council and billed by the council across to the companies. From the 1st of February, the council made a commitment to transfer 5 sites over to ADL, and that predicated a TUPE transfer of the staff. So those 10 staff TUPE transferred over to Aqueous at that point. During the year, Aqueous also expanded at the shareholders' request its board of specialist non-executive directors, and we appointed Michelle Hyde, who has a housing association background, and Alex Wright, who is a professor of architecture at Bath University, to the board. So that's ADL. We then have ACL, which is currently delivering 95 apartments at the Riverside View site. and that development is now wholly complete. As at the 31st of March 2020, when the accounts were covered, we had completed 21 apartment sales in the year. Just the north block of the development was complete at that stage. That generated £1 million in profit of a £4.7 million turnover. And the other development site that was only just starting, and literally was just kicking off at that time, was Sladebrook Road in Bath, which is going to be 9 low energy family homes. And that site is progressing well at this point. As Andy said, the company delivered £607,000 of revenue returns to the council, and that rises to £1 million in future years as per the council's medium-term plan. No other development sites have transferred in the year or subsequently. It's probably worth me just very quickly saying a little bit about the impacts of COVID-19. As you're probably very well aware, construction and development have continued throughout the lockdowns. The government have prioritised this area. We worked with the contractors on the sites to make sure we have safe COVID working practices in place in line with government guidance, and we continue to do that. And our site at Sladebrook Road is continuing now through the current lockdown. We only really had one real issue to do with COVID, and that's to do with one of our tenants in one of the rental properties who has got significantly into arrears, and we've been working very closely with housing colleagues to try and assist that tenant as much as possible. So that's probably as much as I want to say. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. I would just put for everybody as a line that this is questions on companies in the chat. Do I have any people who'd like to ask questions? Yes, Winston, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Just several questions. One is just Andy Rothery first. Andy, what do you see the role of corporate scrutiny versus the audit committee on this one? Well, are you expecting us to go through this line by line, or is that the job of the audit scrutiny?
I'd say there's slightly different roles. I'd say the audit committee is more about the quality of the accounts themselves and how they fit into the audit findings reports of the council's wider audit through Grant Thornton. So slightly different. So I'd say role of scrutiny is more about kind of financial performance. So just thinking about more of the business side of things and interplay between council and company. If that helps.
Right. Second question to you, Andy. If this is a wholly owned part of Baines, why aren't we using Grant Thornton? Why are we using the other company, Monaghan's, to do the audit?
That's a very good question. I'm going to ask Tim to come in on that because he'll have a very good answer.
Right, Tim. Just to give you advance notice of the others, do we really need 6 directors plus 2 NEDs on this? I'm quite in favour of the NEDs, by the way. It's the other 5 directors apart from you that I'm querying whether we really do need that amount. Secondly, there's bonuses paid in this year. Now, I don't think we do that anywhere else in the council, and the figure's quite high in relationship to the pay. In fact, it's about 50% of the pay in those accounts on ADL. That looks high. And then the third comment is very little investment in purchase of investment property in 1920 versus 1819. Is that just a cyclical factor, or are there other things behind it? So 3 questions in all, I think, there.
Okay, let me start, Councillor, with the audit question. Yes, we do need different auditors. Grant Thornton would be conflicted because they audit the council, and as part of the council, they audit the company. So at the moment, as this year, the council has to consolidate its accounts with Aquis. Grant Thornton are actually working closely with Monaghan's to complete their statements. The appointment of Monaghan's is subject to the approval, though, of Grant Thornton, and that approval was given when we appointed Monaghan's. In terms of bonus payments, bonuses are paid, and they're paid in accordance with the remuneration policy strictly agreed by the council. They're certainly not 50% of salaries. They're small bonuses. It's probably just the way the accounts show in terms of the salaries being recharged to ADL and to ACL. The majority of the salaries are charged into ACL, where the majority of the activity actually takes place. In terms of directors, there are only two executive directors. That's myself as managing director and Derek Quilter as the executive director of operations. All of the other directors are non-executive, so there were only two executive directors. And in terms of investment property, yes, these are the properties transferred by the council. I just think that in 1819 we had a good flow across of investment properties. During 1920, they haven't flowed across quite so quickly. There were a few issues that the council was resolving in the flow of those properties, but we did see 4 further properties flow across after the accounting deadline, and we're currently working with the council on another one at the moment. We're obviously very keen to take those as quickly as they can flow across from the council.
Okay, does that answer your question? I've got Lucy next.
Hello, sorry, it's just about the lines in the account. I think Winston's actually asked my question, which was again about the bonuses, which seem to be listed in the administrative expenses as 50% of the salaries. And I just wondered, also as a member of the public looking at the accounts, where you see the staffing costs now coming through as negative on gross profit, it does make the accounts look quite different, and the profit before taxation is therefore much reduced. Does that have any kind of practical consequences, or is it just really how the accounts are living? Because all the directors' salaries and the permanent staff are coming through now as that administrative expense, whereas before they were within the council. So what does that mean, anything practically?
I think actually things will be much cleaner in the next financial year. As I said, up till the 1st of February 2020, all of the staff were employed by the council. So the costs were billed by the council to the relevant company. Whereas now the staff are employed by ADL and are only billed on to ACL for the work those staff do on ACL. So I think what you've seen is in that year, because there were 2 different types of transactions going on, it's made the accounts probably appear a little bit more confusing in terms of the way staffing is dealt with. From 2020 onwards, it will be much cleaner because the staff are employed directly by ADL.
Okay, I've got Hal next.
In fact, most of mine has been answered. It was about the flow of new properties. There was a thing I wondered about, and you could probably tell me, but I noticed when I'm at the WECA meetings, they have a pretty substantial investment fund there, and that they use that investment fund to buy properties that they can see or land that they're going to need in the future. And I just wondered, is there any collaboration between you and WECA in that regard?
It's probably best if Andy picks that up.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McPhee. I'll take this one. So in terms of the WECA funds, a lot of the land acquisition is funded from the investment fund, which is a government fund that has certain conditions. It's largely utilised to address development viability gaps. So that's really where councils act as the kind of the client and commissioner to take forward policy-led housing and really achieving housing targets. So the WECA money, it addresses that short-term viability to allow the council to take land to the point of development. So there is a degree of separation needed between the council and, say, Aquis as our company, where the council would look at development opportunity, find maybe a site that has a viability gap. Once it's ready for development, it would be put out onto the market and considered in terms of a development partner. By all means, Aquis at that point could be an appropriate development partner.
I see. Okay.
Okay, I've put myself in to ask a question, not as chair, but as a member of the panel. I struggle altogether to understand these companies, because they are so very different from the council, and there is a governance, but I have to confess I don't really understand the governance, because they are separate companies, and so they're meant to be separate from the council. Yet we're here today, we have accounts before us to scrutinise, and yet they're quite different. And I'll address this to you, Andy, that those levels of salary there have obviously been set by a private company that the council just happens to own. That's the correct interpretation, isn't it? Because I know I've had comments from members of the public who say, gosh, you know, that's a lot of money we're spending on salaries and bonuses, which, as the comment's already been made, that actually in the council people don't get bonuses. So what would you say to me about either the ability of this panel to even comment on that, and are these salaries, we could say to the public, comparable with the market value that we would expect to pay in a normal property company?
Yeah, I think it's completely appropriate to raise a question, Chair. I think this does predate me a little bit in terms of the establishment of the company, but my understanding is that all salaries within the company went through an independent process to deem them suitable and were assessed against the markets. So in the same way that I suppose within the council, any newly established role would need to go through a remuneration process to establish the appropriate pay grade.
Okay, and in raising this issue, I specifically made it general because I don't want to be at all personal, but I think it's incumbent on us today to ask questions like this. And then in terms of like the figures that are there, I was trying to get from you more of a sense of how does that relate to what the plan and the objective was for this company, both in terms of financial generation of surplus and best use of assets to help support the public good, but also, like, is this business plan and the objectives of this company developing in a direction based on these accounts that meet why it was set up in the first place? As somebody who understands finances far better than I do, can you say and illustrate why this then is really going in the right direction?
Okay, well, I think we've got two different items here, because today's item is looking at the 1920 accounts and how they performed, which they've illustrated performance is improving. I think the separate question is about the future and business planning.
If I could just cut in, I'm not asking you that specifically. I'm saying, do these accounts meet the objectives which were set out at least at the time for the period they relate to? Because I think it's unfair to talk about the future, because that's not the agenda item. What I want to know is presumably you had like a 5-year business plan. Here are the results for a discrete year. Are they on track, you know, for now, as to I mean, I suppose what I'm building up to, but not necessarily, is are these bonuses justified? As it ticked the box that it was meant to? It's like you set people an objective in a company or an organization. If they achieve that objective, then you get your bonus. So is this company on track? Has it met its objective that those bonuses were related to?
Yes. So the accounts show the performance of the company, and that does show the positive achievement of sales, which has led to company profit that's generated bonus payments.
So it's on target in that year.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just looking down the list. I've got Alistair Singleton finally. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. A question also about remuneration, if I can build on where the Chair has just been. And I appreciate that the future doesn't look like the past, but there's a lot in the accounts about pension payments. And I'm aware that staff have been TUPE'd across. What sort of pension arrangements are in place now for the future? Do they remain defined benefit? Are they defined contribution? Do they reflect the local government pension scheme shape? What do they look like?
I can answer that one. So in terms of the staff that transferred across, they're in the local government pension scheme and they're protected as part of that. And all the related costs are charged through to the company. For new staff, we have a defined contribution nest scheme, which is in line with the government's national new scheme for employers. So that's for new staff, and we had 3 staff on that. We now have 2 staff on that because we've reduced our staffing recently. So we have 2 staff on the nest scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just getting my screen back. So I think that's all the questions I've got. Or Sean, have you? Sorry, Sean, off you go.
Oh yeah, so I didn't quite understand the answer to Paul's question. So, I mean, how do you scrutinise a company if you don't know what their objective is and what their targets are? So, what are the objectives and who sets them? Are they set by the council, or do they set their own targets?
The shareholders set objectives. Tim will be able to add a bit more to that.
So yes, Sean, the objectives are set very clearly. Every year we have to bring forward a 3-year rolling business plan. The 3-year rolling business plan sets out a whole range of objectives, from all of the financial objectives that are incorporated into the council's medium-term financial plan, to some site-specific objectives to do with energy efficiency, all sorts of things. So those objectives are set in the business plan, and that business plan has to be approved every year by the shareholder. And yeah, for the year in question, that was approved the previous year. So we're just going through the process now and waiting for sign off of the next business plan.
So is it possible we can see the business plan and understand what the objectives are before we scrutinise the accounts?
I'm sure we can arrange a separate item once the latest business plan's been agreed.
Yeah, but we're talking about the previous, the ones in front of us. We're being asked to scrutinise, but we haven't been given the other part of the equation, which is what the objectives were that were set. We don't know if they've hit the targets with these accounts or not. Does that make sense, or am I wrong? Sorry.
No, it's actually a completely fair point, and we can provide the prior year's business plan, obviously in retrospect, because you've not had it in advance.
So could I just clarify to help us here, Sean? I mean, in a way, Sean, that was the point I was making, and thank you for eruditely clarifying that. Our role today, and Andy, could you please explain what you think our role is now? I mean, obviously we've scrutinised, that they're inverted commas, this thing. What do we actually, we haven't got sign off of these accounts. It's really just to put it through our scrutiny process. So can we, I wonder whether you could clarify that for me.
Yeah, I think we're all learning as we go with this, because it is a council company. Whilst AQUIS was set up some time ago, it's still relatively newly formed. I would really see the role of scrutiny as thinking from a council lens, based on the performance and director statement in the accounts. In terms of council assurance, dividend being achieved, interest and profit. So are things looking like they're going in the right direction? I think they're the sorts of things that I would be looking for if I was sat in your place scrutinising, really from a council perspective, but thinking about the interplay between council and company.
Okay. If perhaps I could suggest, as your chair, we move on now to our panel discussion on what we make of this, because I think we've all had our chance for questions, if that's all right. Would anybody like to open the debate as such on where this then leaves us and what our comment and conclusion should be? Sean?
Yeah, I find the whole thing quite confusing, if I'm honest. The whole ADL, ACL, the relationship between them and our own property services, the remit of each of those particular organisations, the remit of these organisations, the viability of these organisations. I find the whole thing quite confusing, and I'm sure if I find it confusing, I'm sure other people in the public do as well. I'm not sure if they're inside our scrutiny or outside of council scrutiny. They're certainly not part of the Montague Evans reports that's been done into property services. So I do find it quite a confusing picture.
Okay. I didn't put in this sort of drawing a line, and in Zoom I've got Sean. Sean, did you just speak off the list? Or Lucy, are you speaking on this issue now? Is your request to speak now, or was that previous?
It's previous. I'm happy for other people to speak
Oh,
first.
no, that's okay. So as I say, I'll just draw, I'll write line in the chat so we know. Does anybody else wish to speak? Okay, from a personal point of view, my comment would be, I don't think this is helped by the governance, which has had to come in for obvious legal reasons to separate the council and the arm's length companies. But I think, you know, it can appear a bit unfair all round that it's not very clear how it works. And you know, we've raised questions today, which I imagine if I was in the company might seem a bit odd when I know so much about it being in the company. But from the outside, it's not easy. And I would very much welcome an opportunity for us. I don't think we're going to solve it today, but I would welcome an agenda item where we could have an explanation again for newer councillors and people on the panel, and maybe people who've been here a while, as to how does this governance work, and scrutinise the governance and whether it's clear or not. And generally, you know, I'd like to reach out to Councillor Samuels, Richard Samuels, to say, you know, for you almost to join in the discussion, to say from your point of view in the council, does the governance meet the way you want to work, and actually have a constructive, you know, scrutiny of the governance and understanding how it works as much as the accounts, because I'm not sure we're going to get any further today looking at the accounts. But I think as a scrutiny panel, we might be able to offer something constructive in just going through those governance arrangements. What do members of the panel feel? Deathly hush.
If I could say, I mean, it does make sense, doesn't it, that we have a company that will do property development for us and give the profits to the council. I mean, as a basic position, that makes sense. I'm sure we're doing better by doing that than if we had developers in. So, I mean, I'm positive about it. But what is wrong with the idea that we follow up Sean's idea, that we actually look at what was the objectives that were set, and each year we look at the objectives that are set and just make sure that they are being achieved, if bonuses are being paid, etc. So, I mean, I don't kind of have as much a problem, I think, as you with the idea. It just seems a very logical thing for us to do, to make profits that developers would have made otherwise.
Could I just come back? I don't know whether I haven't made it clear. I don't have a problem with the principle at all. What I have a question about is our role and the governance, understanding how we affect that arrangement. I genuinely don't think I questioned whether there should or shouldn't be a company. I questioned the way we're doing it. I raised it and then Sean clarified that we're presented with accounts, but we haven't seen the business plan as such alongside it.
And I agree with that.
And I have a sense that even when I was in the cabinet in the previous administration, that when issues come up, it's a very different structure and way of working to what we're used to. Now, I know that's proper and it's all been discussed and agreed, but I think it would be good to just check and understand hear how that does work. You know, who is the shareholder? Well, it's sort of the leader of the council with the cabinet. And what is the role of scrutiny? What can and can't be scrutinised, and things like that. And even if it's just an explanation to start with from someone like Andy, or with the help of the legal team, I really welcome the chance to understand. And then I think we, for next time round with the accounts, will be better placed to understand our role. But I would request that we don't have a massive presentation on legal babble, however relevant and fabulous it is. It would be lovely to actually know what it means. Do you know what I mean? If someone tried to lay out all these rules, I think once I saw a diagram as to how it worked with dotted lines, as opposed to a 50-page document of legal text. Yeah. So Alistair, sorry, Hal, I don't know whether that clarifies that, but are we up for putting an agenda item down for somebody just to explain how it works? Yeah.
I think Richard's going to speak up.
Yeah. Have I got? Yeah, Richard Samuel. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are two issues here. I mean, when you're being asked to look at the audit and presentation of the final accounts, that is purely a technical, it's a technical issue. You're looking at what happened to the finances, the ups and downs, the governance of the company, and those are kind of quite discrete issues. I think what members of the panel are talking about is what are the objectives set for the companies in any particular year. And of course, those are essentially cabinet matters. And so you are perfectly entitled to look at how those were done. As far as the governance is concerned, of course, the governance has been approved by the council. So we, again, I am perfectly supportive of your suggestion to have a look at this again. Personally, I think it is a little bit more complicated than it should be. And I think the transfer agreement was agreed last year, and you will see the full effect of in the current in the financial year we're in now, when those feed through to the accounts. I think it has proved to be quite a challenging agreement that we all signed up to. And my own position is I would like to see it simplified and made more transparent, which I think is what a number of members are saying. So I'm very willing to be part of that discussion and with you, and let's have a look at it, because I think we are confusing those two things: the technical issue of the accounts themselves and the executive issues of the setting of objectives and how those turned out when the year finishes. So I agree, let's have this on a future agenda, and let's try and pull it together. So I'm very supportive of the idea of doing that.
So if I could come in, Richard, if I rephrased what I said to say that there is this technical role of scrutinising these accounts, linked it in as a proposal that we'd benefit from seeing the appropriate plan that went alongside it, but that in the light of maybe not always understanding on this panel what the governance issues are, that as a separate but parallel issue, we have it on our agenda for a presentation on how the structure works. And that, I'm very eager that we can work with you in a positive sense out of that, to take on board comments and do some scrutiny to see whether we can make the world a better place and actually support what ultimately everybody wants for the best. Yeah. So does that seem like a reasonable thing to conclude, to resolve, to put it on a future agenda? Yeah.
It does. The objectives will generally be set as part of the council's budget setting, because a line will appear in the budget either for capital receipts or the payment of revenue payments. The only qualification I'd put on that, and Tim Richards will know this very well, is that the pipeline of schemes that come forward are, of course, subject to all sorts of influences, not the least which is the role of the council as the planning authority, which can have a fundamental impact on the final appearance of a scheme compared with where it started. And that has been the case this year, that a number of schemes have been subject to negotiation with the planning team, and the schemes have turned out a bit different to where they started. And that can affect the objectives in due course. But I think it would be worth weaving that into this look at the totality of the process.
So that's good. So am I right in thinking, is there somebody who'd second my proposal, if you can remember what it was, which was to put it on the agenda? Are we all right with that? And Sean, are you seconding? Yeah. And could I put it to the vote then? All those in favour that we put an agenda item on to tackle this? So I've got, yeah, we've got that unanimous. And Michaela, insofar as we've heard very different permutations, you're clear that what we're going to do for the minutes, yeah? So for today, I believe, hopefully as chair, we've raised questions and scrutinised these accounts. We're not required, are we, Michaela, to actually take a vote or do anything more? No? Excellent. So I'd like to thank Andy and Tim for coming today and taking us through those accounts, and we look forward to seeing you at some point in the future. And otherwise, I had hoped to finish by 6, but we're not doing too badly. We've just got one agenda item left. If I could move us on to that now, please, which is our panel work plan. If it's possible for you to get that in front of you in your papers, then we've got a list of items. Now, the next meeting, as your chair, I would advise that we do not, unless it's extremely pressing, have anything other than the council budget on the February agenda, because as sure as Councillor Samuels will hopefully nod to support this, we'll have quite enough on going through such our largest objective and item of business probably of the year as an agenda item. So we're looking at after that, and we do have a list of some items on the document circulated for the meeting. Now, we've got the, let's see, what have I got? I just need to change screens. I know, Al, to deal with it, you made a request that we looked at Invest in Bath. Do you recall this? Do you wish to raise that while I get my screen up on this?
Yes, although as Invest in Bath, it's even more urgent because its role has changed recently, hasn't it?
Are you asking me, or are you?
Well, anyway, I'm certainly interested to see Invest in Bath, in particular as well, to see what they've actually invested in North East Somerset was the real thinking behind my question.
Okay, so I've got that one. We have on the second page, not to be missed, of our document here, our forward plan, we've got 2 items which are very much on the list, which is contacting the council, which we've deferred from before, and we've also got from council the parental leave policy. Okay, so I think both of those, certainly those 2 outstanding items, need to go on the March agenda. Okay, we've got a property services review coming through from consultants, which Councillor Samuel has said we would be invited to have a role to scrutinise and work with him on that. And I think depending on when that's available, we may, as we said earlier, call a special meeting, which may have to be partly public, partly private. So we've got that on our list. Do members have any other items that they would like to consider for the work plan? Because as all members of the panel, this is your work plan. So Karen.
Yeah, Maybe there are some policies that might be useful in the corporate strategy, the 3 points at the beginning of the people strategy, corporate strategy slide.
Okay, so would you like that agenda item to be policy and corporate strategy?
Yeah, I think that would be.
Okay.
That would be fine.
And you would like to hear be presented with what they are, yeah? And then have we'll look at it, yeah?
Yeah, and because, I mean, it's a relatively broad brush. I mean, point one is improving people's lives. So, you know, there's an awful lot of detail below that will inform that. And then obviously got climate and nature emergency, sustainability for point two, and I can't remember what point three is, sorry. So there'll be a lot of tasks and policies underneath that, and I think that this panel is in a position to constructively assist with those. Okay,
so does anybody else have any items they'd like to add? Mark?
Yeah, just given the information we were given earlier about preparing for the future programme and its reliance on IT, I just wonder whether we could have something that presented to us about IT strategy. I don't think I've ever seen anything presented to us specifically on IT strategy, and I think it's going to become increasingly important if we're going to support the kinds of flexibility that we're talking about.
Okay, that's excellent. So are there any more suggestions or comments? No? So just to summarise, by default, we've got the ADL, ACL sort of governance that we just discussed. I've got Al's point about invest in Bath there. We've got the property services report coming through that may need a special. We've got contacting the council and parental leave. We've got policy and corporate strategy, and then from Mark, IT strategy. So it doesn't seem like, oh, go on, Karen.
Yeah, sorry, 2 points. The contacting the council may be part of the IT strategy, so just bear that in mind. They may be interlinked as opposed to, and they probably are in many areas.
I'm sure they'll be connected.
Yeah, well,
but I think
they jolly well should be, for many reasons. And then the other one is the people strategy, because we were asking them to bring back the, I think was it just the future programme in 6 months' time?
Yeah.
An update on the presentation that they've given today.
So if I put January plus 6 months, yeah, then we've got that. So on that basis, if you're happy that obviously the next meeting's the budget, we do our best to bring in the property services and those items like that came from council. If you leave it with Winston and I working with the officers, we'll put that together to move forward with. So I feel like it's really important that you do regard this as your agenda. I'm just your chair, my job's to manage it. So could I propose and have a seconder, that without me having to read all that list again, that's our list for our forward plan that we work out and get on our agenda. So could I propose that? Could I have a seconder? Karen, and could I have a show of all those in favour that that's our list? Yeah.
Chair, can I just say one thing? I sent you an email on the 7th of January, which you, David, and I need to go through, because Hal did have some other things, and Lucy had some other things, and Alistair did. But we need to decide whether they're right for corporate scrutiny. So outside of this meeting, offline, as it were, you and I and David need to have that discussion.
All right, and I'm sorry if I've missed that and not connected it, but I would have thought you'd raise it now, as long as you're not feeling disenfranchised, are you? You're quite happy with what Winston...
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy, and they're probably for later on in the year, if David thinks they're appropriate for corporate scrutiny. Some are, some may not be, so we need to have that discussion within you and I.
Okay, well, Michaela, can you definitely minute that Winston's got another list, a little list, it sounds quite long, and that's excellent, and then we'll feed that in. But if at any time people are interested in an item, then I think by all means email Michaela and copy Winston and I in, because we want this to be your meeting and our meeting together to do the best job possible. So on that basis, I believe, if Michaela can confirm, we've reached the end of our scrutiny meeting. I'd like to thank everybody here and officers for taking part, and for anybody watching at home or work. And as I say, I look forward to our next meeting. So thank you, everybody. And I think that concludes